So, as we talked about in the last lecture, that there was a movement to ban the slave trade, but with increased interest in Africa for other reasons. I mean, not that there was always reasons there for trade, but Africa has always had things that are desired around the world, and to this day we don't see a difference in that. Nigeria is a huge place for oil production now, and the U.S. is heavily involved in the affairs of Nigeria, just for example. Although you probably don't think about that much or talk about that much, um, and we see minerals and obviously diamonds we've talked about. So after the slave trade, there was increased production of gold, ivory, coconuts, and cloves. And there was growing industries of raw cotton. And so cotton, of course, helps make textiles. And that was it was king cotton in the South for the Southerners. So cotton, very important. Gum Arabic to make glues and dyes. Here we're seeing a picture of a lady here from the region of Sudan. And then palm oil was a leading lubricant for Europe's industrial machines. That's a really important factor. Now, again, sometimes it's almost like boring, like when people hear a discussion of goods, right? But you got to remember that wars, political intrigue, all these things are always about the goods. Nations don't go to other nations without a reason. That's almost a given, okay? I mean, I can't 100% say that. I mean, I haven't looked over every case, but it seems to be always the case, at least from what I've been exposed to, okay? So, going back to the slave trade. So, paradoxically, banning of slaves, the slave trade strengthened it in Africa. And how did it do that? There was simply a relocation of the slave trade from the west to the east. And so between 1800 to 1870, at least 1 million more slaves were shipped from Africa to the Americas. And basically this is kind of, and we're going to see more information on this. You kind of looked into that on the Mahdi video. And if you read the book, that Islam and Christianity and Judaism see themselves as religions of liberation. That's true in a certain sense. But slavery, it has a very mixed legacy in all three religions. And so, again, with Islam, this is a time period where Islam really, in the East, kind of accentuates slave trade as it's being banned and being condemned morally by Christians in the West. But what you're going to see, and I'm going to keep it going back to this, is the question of slavery being evil by Europeans is seen as like ridiculously hypocritical, especially since they're ending slavery at a time that they're advancing Western interests into Africa. I don't think that it took that much to figure out for some African nationalists or intellectuals to say what's the concern is not the moral problems of how Africans are treated, but the more efficient ways in which Europeans can get what they want out of Africa. Now, is that fair? Is there a counterbalance to that discussion? Well, again, I'm just cracking open things for you to think about that are discussed within historical and political circles. So, and then slavery itself was not banned until later, as I mentioned, U.S. 1865, after a civil war killing lots of people. Think about this. Canada never had a civil war to end slavery, and the British ended slavery. I thought it was interesting. I think it was a British philosopher, Samuel Johnson, when the American colonists were rebelling against, the British Empire, our independence. He said, I think it was almost a direct quote. It's interesting that the drivers of the Negroes yelp the most about liberty. In other words, that the white slave owners in the American colonies made the biggest cries of liberty at a time when the British actually were not believing in slavery. Just something also to think about. Interesting little controversial note to bring up. So Anyways, go on here and see if this slide's gonna actually work. Okay, so I'm going to stop the lecture here and we're going to get into Islam in West Africa. So remember, I talked about Islam mainly being north and east, also talking about Arab influence, but Islam really is a major religion. And remember, we talked about also that it's one of the Arabic is one of the first languages on a major scale to actually be a written language within Africa itself. So we'll get back to that in the next lecture.